Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Bob Hoye from Chartsandmarkets.com runs down the major markets, including the TSX and the S&P 500. Gold continued its rally, but fell short of the $3,000 mark. Bob also looks at copper and crude. Investigative journalist Sam Super Scooper Cooper blows the lid off money laundering and how the Chinese government connection to the drug trade has made our homes ultra expensive and has led to the deadly fentanyl crisis on our streets. He believes there's no doubt Canada's politicians have turned a blind eye to this criminal activity. Founder of the Schachter.Energy Report.ca, Josef Schachter, joins us from Calgary to drill deep into the energy sector. He can't believe Trudeau wants to blow at least $40 billion on a high-speed rail line instead of building pipelines. He also has a warning about what could spur Alberta to leave Canada. Josef also has a special offer for our listeners. We'll talk to Bob Hoye right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for Chartsandmarkets.com. He's speaking to us from Vancouver. Welcome back to This Week in Money, Bob. And how was your experience with the little bump we had just before our interview at 1:27 Pacific Standard Time?
Yeah, well, I was stretched out on my sofa very comfortably, reading my computer, and then it started, and I knew immediately that it was an earthquake, and I thought, "Ooh, I think this is the most noticeable one since for a long time, absolute long time." And of course, I'm an old geologist, geophysicist, and I thought, "Ooh, I wonder where this is located, how thing." And so, but it was just up the coast from Vancouver, and did you say what, a 4.7?
4.8. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Two strong bumps where I was in New Westminster. Sister-in-law reported that on the North Shore of Vancouver, it lasted about 30 seconds and rearranged the pictures on her wall.
Mine didn't come down nor get bumped around, but in my study, I've got interesting things on the wall, but they're taped on with the masking tape. So hey, they're fine.
Well, speaking of numbers, how do the stock markets look this week?
Well, the Toronto set a pretty good high at the end of January, and that's the TSE index, and it's been sideways since. And then the Standard & Poor's 500 in the States, it's been choppy. Then it kind of rallied into last week, and in a modest correction since. And then we checked out for the NASDAQ, which is a different flavored index, and essentially the same pattern. And then I thought, well, what the hell's been going on with the bond sector? And the bond future, now it had a huge speculative high in September, meaning long rates were low, and I think they were realizing that inflation wasn't going to be as bad as they expected. And the bond price has been coming down ever since, stabilizing lately. And then, of course, we're always interested in gold, and its rally it didn't quite make 3,000, and then it's been on a modest correction to kind of like 2,900. Oh, I got a number written here, 2,936. So gold has got a lot of attraction lately, been acting very well, and maybe getting a little overbought. But hey, you always got to have some gold. Now, copper is interesting because it did a straight-up thing to $5.20 in May last year, May 2024, and that was on the story that there was going to be shortages of copper. Well, it came down to $4 November, December, and now it's kind of recovering here, $4.67, and we like to note that copper can often do a seasonal rally into March. So, hey, it's acting well now, but it got hammered last year. And the same, we want to take a look at crude oil, which was up to a really good number, 87.67 last May, and then it's been correcting, and it's been lately trading around 72. That's a nice drop. Maybe the next one of these we do, I can look and see how gasoline prices are doing, but I just didn't have time for that. But listen, there's a nice little headline, not a little, but an important headline out there that I just noticed, and it was a survey by Bank of America. Quote, investors haven't been so risk-on since 2010. And what that is saying is that a whole lot of speculators, punters, and investors are full right up to their ears in stocks, and that's usually a dangerous sign, because as it comes down to the question about how many more can get in. But I'm also going to tell you, Jim, at the opposite, at a low, nobody's talking about risk on. They're complaining about getting hit by the markets, and I hate to say it, but it's as old as the hills.
Bob, they forget that old saying, buy low, sell high.
Buy low, sell high, yeah, or the other way around, sell high and then buy low. Hey, whatever. Wherever we are on the cycle for stocks, we try and get it sorted out. So anyways, this has been a fun little interview, Jim.
Bob, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
We look forward to doing it again.
My guest has been market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for chartsandmarkets.com. If you have any questions for Bob, you can send them to info@housestreet.com. Coming up, Sam Cooper next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Sam Cooper. He's a Canadian investigative journalist and the best-selling author of Willful Blindness, How a Network of Narcos, Tycoons, and Communist Chinese party agents infiltrated the West. His website is thebureau.news, and he's on X at Scooper Cooper. I love that one, Sam. Sam, welcome to This Week in Money.
Good to be with you today.
Sam, can you tell us a bit about your book, Willful Blindness, and your website, thebureau.news?
Sure. Willful Blindness really came out of my work as a Vancouver Province and Sun reporter, and how I discovered, I would say after 2010, I really focused on the big question in Vancouver is how do those home prices get so high when not everyone is making, huge money or really even close to supporting those multi-million-dollar home prices. And I discovered that a great deal of the money was coming in underground from China and Hong Kong. Not a huge surprise that it was coming from East Asia for anyone sort of with eyes in Vancouver, but I was the one to really discover what was termed the Vancouver model, and that's how underground banking, which essentially are pools of cash controlled by organized crime, was used to lend out money to people traveling into Vancouver to gamble from China. And the money was just laundered throughout the economy, I found, into real estate. And so Willful Blindness told the story of how BC's government-regulated casinos became massive money laundering machines. And when I say massive, billions of dollars, from the early 2000s to where we are now, multi-billions of dollars of drug money laundered. The other piece of the story was discovering that, in fact, the Chinese Communist Party and its agents were very much involved in those underground financial networks and the impacts that has on Canadian society from everything from real estate prices that price sort of the average or perhaps honest income earner out of the city, to the point where doctors and lawyers would often probably struggle to buy homes with their salaries unless they got into, in the case of lawyers, as I say, a lot of them unfortunately got into money laundering themselves. And the political piece of Willful Blindness is about how the Chinese Communist Party and other nefarious regimes around the world use this illicit finance to interfere in our elections and really hold sort of a surveillance and monitoring of diaspora populations in Canada. So Willful Blindness really led to what people now understand is the story of Chinese election interference that occurred or has been occurring for a long time in Canada, but we've had inquiries looking into the recent elections. And after breaking that particular story at Global News, where I went after graduating, or rather moving from the Vancouver Sun, I moved over to Ottawa and started covering how this whole system of finance and interference has moved across the country and really, I would say, is involved in undermining our parliament. And so in 2023, I decided to launch my own website, thebureau.news, and become, I would like to say, Canada's sort of leading independent investigative journalism website, and really covering North America and the world with these same sort of issues and sort of doing the same type of deep reporting that Willful Blindness became, really quite a successful Canadian book in the marketplace for my work.
So what exactly is the Vancouver model?
This was the term that an Australian professor who followed my reporting at the Vancouver Sun that broke the stories of, how BC casinos were being used. And in simple terms, the Vancouver model is how Canada's West Coast economy is used to launder drug money that is circulating around the world. And when I say that, we're talking about Chinese transnational crime, which is extremely sophisticated and financially driven, working together with Latin American, Mexican drug trafficking cartels to move dirty money around the world. But the Vancouver model, the very specific, finding was that people were traveling from China and Hong Kong to gamble in our government-regulated casinos, and to do so, there's a $50,000 capital export limit in China, but to get around that, these gamblers were simply making a deal with Chinese transnational gangsters set up in Vancouver who ran underground banks, literally warehousing drug cash, including the proceeds of fentanyl. And this would be loaned out to gamblers that traveled into Vancouver. When I say loaned out, duffel bags, hockey bags of drug cash given to casino gamblers who would walk predominantly into the Richmond's River Rock Casino, use that drug cash, cash out, and with their chips or their checks or their government-approved cash when they leave that casino, and they would pay back that drug cash from China, where they have their source of wealth. They would pay it right into a drug trafficker's bank account, and what that did was it moved those fentanyl proceeds from the streets of Vancouver back to China, produce more fentanyl precursors, which would then be shipped back into Vancouver's port, and the cycle continues. And really, if I want to jump ahead here, many people know that the U.S. government, and specifically President Donald Trump, has cited Canada's weakness on fentanyl trafficking and exporting, and the Vancouver model is how that happens, and BC is of special concern.
It looks like the Vancouver housing market topped around May of 2022, possibly ending a housing bubble that has defied logic. When purchasing real estate in BC, people are now required to declare where their purchasing money came from. Could this declaration coincide with the top of the market?
I do believe that is one impact that could start to put a little bit of a damper on BC real estate prices. And I agree with you that the prices defy standard economic logic. But I do believe that I've provided in my book, Willful Blindness, and at the Bureau, the real reason for those prices is this international drug trafficking money laundering model, which is set up in Vancouver and Toronto, very, very much infiltrating real estate, infiltrating banks, infiltrating stock markets, and other sectors of the economy, from law offices to luxury car dealerships. And so my answer to the question is, whether it's the top or not, if Canada is in fact seriously about to crack down on this model of money laundering, we've heard that Canada has implemented a so-called fentanyl czar following a request from the American government. And if this fentanyl czar is getting together with the heads of the big six banks, and as we've read reports that at least there are some discussions that this type of money laundering, that is massive fraud in mortgage lending to these underground banking networks. If there's really a lid put on that type of lending, I do think that the Vancouver real estate market and Toronto, and by extension Canada's whole real estate market, will return closer to standard economic models, where you'll see incomes, that is legal incomes, starting to correlate a lot more to housing prices, especially in Vancouver.
Is the declaration of where money is from causing money laundering to bypass real estate in BC and move elsewhere?
Well, I have detailed that, as a matter of fact, not so much the declaration of where those funds are from, but the COVID-19 pandemic put a stop to these, the casinos, of course, had to close during the pandemic, at least for some time. And FinTrack, that's Canada's financial watchdog, detailed how massive amounts of wire transfers from Hong Kong financial entities and ultimately China started to be wired into Canada's banking system, and especially in Toronto area, where these very same underground banking networks run by what are called triads or international Chinese transnational financial criminals, they started to use what are called money mule, or sort of straw bank holder accounts, where a front person would be accepting those wire transfers, and looming behind them was the gang that is laundering the money that way. So it'll take more than a financial declaration, I think, to really put an end to this. But what I'm describing is that when you sort of stop the casino money laundering, it moves in another sophisticated direction by using sort of members of a diaspora to front underground banking transactions. And to really put a lid on it, it will take a change in Canada's laws, I would say.
With a spotlight being shone on money laundering in the Metro Vancouver real estate market, are money launderers likely to sell their real estate and move their laundered money elsewhere?
I would say that, again, if Canada does respond to the call of the American government, which, by the way, did not start with President Donald Trump, but started earlier, as I've reported, in 2023. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Port Coquitlam Mayor Brad West, who has been a very strong voice on Canada's weakness, or BC's weakness with fentanyl, Canada's weakness with prosecuting transnational crime. So if Canada steps up and changes some of its laws so that money laundering prosecutions actually do proceed to trial, and so that these Mexican cartels, Chinese transnational gangsters that have set up in British Columbia and are running fentanyl super labs and are running essentially, underground banking that infiltrates real regulated banking, if Canada cracks down on it, there's no question that the gangsters that, in my view and in my research, have captured large portions of the Vancouver and Toronto real estate market, they will need to sell and really run away. But that's a very heavy rock to lift. So we'll see what happens.
Has money laundering done any positive things for the BC economy?
My own personal view is no. In long term, certainly people enjoyed, maybe with some sense of naivety, that the miracle that Vancouver home prices were skyrocketing. And of course, it's a beautiful city, and people convinced themselves that the world was coming to Vancouver because of that beauty. Certainly that's a part of the reason, but I argue, I think correctly, that really it was that Vancouver was easily being used to launder money. And so, sure, I mean, some people did and can enjoy the profits from seeing, their real estate investments skyrocket, but where will they be if their children cannot afford a home in Vancouver and have to move away, which, well, I was a young reporter. I moved away from that city because I couldn't afford a home there. So I think a lot of families will experience that, but perhaps even more seriously, I don't think you can really enjoy the benefits of real estate proceeds when you look at the amount of fentanyl deaths happening in Vancouver, which is directly related, I think, to the Vancouver model.
Are investigations likely to start where students moved from offshore to Vancouver and bought multi-million-dollar mansions? I recall one on television. I think it was connected to your story, where they knocked on the door of a $17 million mansion. A 17-year-old girl answered and said, "This is my house." And it could have been you asking, where did the money come from to buy this house? And she had no idea.
I think there were a few famous stories. I wrote one about at least financial investigations found that a UBC student from China owned, I believe, an $18 to $20 million home in the west side of Vancouver, and it came out that her father was connected to a $100 million money laundering scheme. That came out in the Cullen Commission documents, which sort of stemmed from my work. Yeah, there's another story about a very wealthy young woman. I think she indicated that perhaps it was her father's money, behind the home, and that, I believe, that was the one I'm thinking of, was linked to the very famous and sort of prominent investor Peter Brown of Canaccord fame, who didn't have a good reaction to that news story, and I think referred to the father or the person from China as a good person. But I think the point here is that, again, it will all come. Will students that are fronting corruption money or narco money from other countries have to sort of sell their homes and step away from the market? It will all come down to how serious Canada is about changing our laws so that money laundering actually becomes a prosecutable offense in Canada, and so that international organized crime, which has found Canada to be a very soft spot, and my information is that is why Canada has become a fentanyl exporting nation. If Canada toughens up our laws, certainly the students that are fronting that illegal money will be out of the market. But again, that's a very I'm not sure that there's a lot of people that probably are a little bit afraid of such a crackdown on that type of financial activity, because what would happen to the home prices?
Have the money launderers focused mainly on buying high-end homes?
I believe that they have focused on everything from the 300 to 400,000 one-room condo in Vancouver that may be about 300 square feet. So you could have one person or cell of money launderers that buy up a whole apartment of those condos, and that very same money laundering cell connected to fentanyl traffickers, with links to Mexico and China, are buying 10, 20 and above, $30 million mansions across Vancouver in the most sort of exclusive areas. Beyond that, there are, I know for a fact, there are people at the highest levels of international organized crime connected to the development of towers, in Vancouver and Toronto. So it goes all the way from the cheapest property at scale to the towers at scale, I believe.
Have money launderers in Canada been given a free pass due to political corruption?
That's a sensitive question, but my estimation is yes. there are some indicators that the people that get to approve the zoning of turning, a single family home into something that's zoned for a tower, it would make sense that the people involved in this high international scale money laundering would want to find ways to corrupt politicians with those choices. And, I'll point to a story I did with former Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart. And he said he does believe that it is the case that, when we're talking about foreign interference, he believes it has just as much to do with the foreign crime networks that want to influence our real estate markets as it does to have, with geopolitical considerations. And he said a memorable quote to me, if I recall, he said, "I'm looking out my window here in Vancouver at $1 trillion in real estate. There's a lot to play for, and one vote on council can make the difference."
Are investigations sometimes stymied because the first thing they cry is racist if you investigate something that's Chinese? You're only doing it because they're Chinese, not because you're investigating corruption.
Certainly, investigations are stymied, in my estimation, because there are political parties or political classes that have benefited from, such a flood of money into especially Canada's West Coast. And there were very, well-known politicians, from former Mayor Gregor Robertson of Vancouver, I believe former Premier Christy Clark, and others, sort of played the race card when reporters like myself, let's say about 10 years ago, really started to dig into, okay, where actually is this money coming from into Vancouver real estate, and what is the nature of that mystery money? Certainly the race card was played. None other than, I believe, Senator Yuen Pao Wu, the BC senator, has mentioned before that sort of scrutiny of money coming in from other countries into Canada did amount to racism. So I really do think that it has been, a hindrance to financial crime investigations. But there really should be no doubt that the most sophisticated transnational financial criminals with the most powerful state connections are operating from China, are operating in diaspora communities around the world, and these networks are working with the Latin American cartels. And it's not only myself that's indicating that in my investigations. I've recently done a interview again with Mayor Brad West at the Bureau, and he said in confirmation that Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the exact same thing. And furthermore, Secretary of State Blinken shockingly said that the American government, remember this is under the Biden regime, not the Trump administration, the American government believed that China, that is the Chinese Communist Party, is incentivizing and directing the fentanyl trade into North America because it wants to profit and it wants to see North America destabilized.
What percentage of the Metro Vancouver housing market could be money laundering?
In my estimation, it's about 30%. That is about 30% of every real estate dollar in Vancouver is flowing from China and Hong Kong, and much of it, very significant portions, coming through underground banking. And so that, I believe, not only my estimations, but talking to people in regulatory spheres in Canada, so people that have visibility on major banking, major mortgage issuance, FinTrack, people from, RCMP type positions, CSIS, that is Canadian intelligence positions. When I put that all together, we're talking about hundreds of billions have been laundered into Vancouver real estate since about 2010. That's a solid number. Some say on the low side, and that or more in the Toronto market. So it's a massive amount of money flooding through our regulated banks, casinos, and real estate.
How many years has the Vancouver model been going on?
In my research, it really kicked off in the mid-'80s. I do believe it coincided with the Expo 86 sort of developments at scale that involved some very, very wealthy businessmen from Hong Kong buying and developing major portions of the city. And related to that is when casino gambling with many sort of foreign, what they call VIP or whale gamblers traveling into Vancouver and getting these cash, let's call them loans, and gambling in our regulated casinos. That really started to kick off in the late 80s, early 90s. So that is, about 40 years of the Vancouver model working in the west coast of Canada's economy.
Any guess how much money's been laundered into the Vancouver housing market over the years? Billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions?
I believe quite easily hundreds of billions from the early 2000s to this period. Some very astute financial observers say north of hundreds of billions in Vancouver, but I like to be conservative, and I'll just give you a data point. My work that led to the Cullen Commission, that commission in its final report said in 2014, 1.2 billion in cash was laundered through BC government casinos, all of it consistent with these Vancouver model cash transactions and China. And almost, as I know, all or almost all of those gamblers involved were from China and were many involved in sort of real estate buys and development as well. And so the real estate market is much bigger than the casino market. And so you can easily say, I estimate at a low end, $10 billion laundered into Vancouver real estate each year in the modern era is a very low and conservative estimate.
Do you think the Chinese Communist Party owns a lot of Metro Vancouver real estate?
When we account for the fact that whether official Chinese Communist members or sort of covert officials or former People's Liberation Army officials or former Chinese police officials that are involved in major real estate in the Vancouver market, certainly those individuals do have, influential holdings. Beyond that, as I've revealed, and now the U.S. government sort of points to in its open, non-classified statements, China, that is the Chinese Communist Party, has direct relationships with organized crime, people in diaspora communities that the Chinese Communist Party tasks as proxies. So when you count that those people are very much material to this Vancouver model and underground banking, I do think the Chinese Communist Party has quite a tremendous influence within Vancouver's real estate market.
If the government ends up cracking down on money laundering, could it put the real estate market in jeopardy?
That's the trillion-dollar question for Vancouver, and I do think that question makes a lot of business persons and even politicians nervous. I heard that high-level politicians were a little bit nervous around the time of the Cullen Commission, whether that would have, put a pin in the balloon, and it really didn't. There weren't strong measures coming out of the Cullen Commission, although the Cullen Commission revealed the data points and massive money laundering I've just pointed to. But I do think if Canada put in place much stronger anti-money laundering laws, much stronger anti-organized crime laws of the type that the U.S. government is asking for, and really applies them to our real estate banks and other sectors of the economy, it will certainly have a large moderating effect on Vancouver's housing. I don't know that it would lead to a crash or that suddenly a single-family home would be very, kind of correlated to the average income of, maybe times 3 or 4, sort of, which would be much more in line with U.S. housing costs. But I do think you would not be seeing those average income times 12 type property values anymore.
Looks like governments in Canada are not taking President Trump's concerns seriously regarding fentanyl, drugs, and migrants crossing into the U.S. from Canada. If tariffs are implemented, could this have an effect on housing prices in Metro Vancouver?
I do think so. That's a great point. The U.S. government really does. I believe, although not a lot of people think that Donald Trump is making up, the concerns about Canada's weakness on fentanyl. I've indicated he's not. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was expressing similar concerns in a much more diplomatic way. And I do think there's a reticence, especially in Canada's federal government, to respond to implement very strong anti-organized crime laws, or to, put a lot of pressure on the banks. And so it's kind of a situation where you could do the right thing and apply the right laws, drive down those fentanyl deaths, which is the real issue here, see a moderating effect in the real estate market, and maybe children will not have to think about moving away from their hometown of Vancouver or even moving out of the country anymore. And hopefully that's the right path, a moderate path, and a real justice-driven economy. Or, as you say, politicians could ignore this and get hammered with 25% tariffs that ramp up, and a trade war, and more, over-the-top rhetoric from President Trump. So I do think that the first option, that is really cracking down on financial crime, is the right option.
Are there telltale signs that your neighbor has bought their home with laundered money?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I've, over the years in my reporting in Vancouver, once people saw that I was on the issue, I would receive emails where someone would point to, the landscaping isn't being done, and maybe the lights are on once or twice per year, to the extremes of, you have Lamborghinis and McLarens in the driveway with young students driving them in and out. And, it's an uncomfortable position that the neighborhoods now have people looking around, and they have to be put in the position of, okay, where did those people get their money? But when you've got an eye like I have that has sort of been forced to look into this for over 10 years now, you could definitely see the signs. But I just want to stress, I mean, that takes a trained eye, and it also takes, I would never advocate that people really start to develop attitudes that everyone's in on this. But at the same time, it is a major problem, and it's the people in government that really should be looking around for those telltale signs.
What's needed to stop the Vancouver model?
I did a story with a Simon Fraser University data scientist for the Bureau.news about a year ago. The person, young woman, had worked on the as a data scientist also with the anti-organized crime unit in British Columbia, and had great depth of knowledge, and reached out to me after reading my book and reading the Bureau with a study they had done. And they really pointed to the fact that Canada has been running the Asia-Pacific trade strategy ever since Pierre Trudeau promoted this high-level geopolitical and economic plan for Canada. And certainly it has led to growth in Canada's economy. But as sort of shocking as it is to say, this data scientist found that the sort of unintended consequences, or at least unintended for honest Canadian governors, was that diaspora communities were just being used at scale to run the Vancouver model, and had been developing basically parallel to Canada's, legal economy or other communities. The community with connections to China essentially was running its own economic game. And so as tough as it might sound, the laws need to be applied equally to everyone, and there should not be parallel economies for different communities with connections to different countries.
I've heard of someone in a high-end area owning 30 homes. Could this be a red flag for money laundering, or possibly just a real estate investor?
Well, that's certainly from a distance. 30 homes is a lot. You would need to look at, the person's source of wealth. There could be some telltale signs, and you put together, some hard data with some indicators, and you could have your answer. I would need to see more about the case, but that that does call to mind what I said earlier about a case stemming from the Cullen Commission where a young woman, a UBC student, nominally owns an $18 million home on the west side of Vancouver, and yet her father is connected to a $100 million money laundering scheme that I believe was related to sort of Chinese military corruption activities in China. So if you put together a very wealthy person from a communist nation tied to 30 homes, I think there's a pretty solid chance that that's not connected to Canada's legal economy.
Even if real estate salespeople suspect the buyer is laundering money, they could be wrong and lose the sale and their commissions. Why should real estate salespeople be expected to do the job of law enforcement?
It's a great question, really, and it almost gets into a philosophical question, and I've heard this from many people that have to do their reporting to FINTRAC under the law. Of course, Canadian lawyers don't, and that's a huge concern, but realtors or people in other regulated economies that have to report suspicious transactions, that's the law. And yet they say, I think some of them rightly say that they're the ones, the good actors that are following all this suspicious transaction reporting, and nothing ever happens. That is, there may be tremendous suspicious activity, and yet it doesn't result, that reporting to FINTRAC doesn't result in actual money laundering cases from the RCMP. So the system is broken, and it is a waste of time and money for people that follow the honor code and the law, and yet don't see any benefit to it. I mean, it's sort of and yet I wouldn't want to be in that profession and know that someone, basically was nudge, winking about their money, where the money was coming from, and it could be the fentanyl trade. I wouldn't want to take that sale.
Why do you think successive BC premiers have done nothing about the Vancouver model?
I think it gets back to that quote that former Mayor Kennedy Stewart told me, and being the Vancouver mayor and looking out his window downtown, seeing $1 trillion in that beautiful city on Canada's west coast, and saying there's a lot of money to play for there. And there's a lot of chances for corruption to occur. There's a lot of chances of people wanting to tip the scale and turn a single-family home into a 60-story tower, and that just leaves a lot of room for corruption. And when decades of corruption or sort of turning a blind eye to a foreign government getting a foothold in Vancouver, and foreign organized crime networks doing so as well, when that starts to become a major portion of your economy, it could become hard to turn off that tap, and there could be a lot of impacts. So it's a very difficult problem.
Why do you think law enforcement has not shut down the Vancouver model?
At the end of the day, law enforcement, although we hear otherwise, law enforcement is politically directed in Canada, and that goes for Canada's federal force. As as experts that sometimes can't be named, sometimes can, indicate to me that it would take leadership at the highest sort of bureaucratic policing levels and ministerial levels in Ottawa to really make sure that this financial crime is taken seriously. And if that leadership is not there, then it won't be cracked down on. And we will find ourselves getting visits from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, or angry and abrasive words from President Trump.
British Columbia just had an election. There are widespread concerns about election fraud. What are you hearing?
I haven't followed the story on the ground so much about the Conservative opposition claiming there was election fraud in the provincial election, but what I can say is, for the Bureau, I've reported on intelligence that pointed to the same types of networks that allegedly have infiltrated Canada's Parliament. If we're paying attention to the so-called NSI COP 2024 report, those very same networks, consistent of Chinese officials, so-called diaspora community leaders, political staff, politicians, are very active from the municipal levels in the Vancouver region up to the provincial level. So I think we would be very naive to believe that there wasn't interference in the last provincial election from China and other nations, and that there wasn't fraud occurring. Whether there's any accountability, that's another big question that I don't have the answer for.
Do you think President Trump wants to remove influence in Canada from the Chinese Communist Party and the World Economic Forum and could take down this government's politicians and even political parties in Canada?
My sense is that China and the United States are on a collision course, and that means the chances of war, especially starting around the nation of Taiwan and China's stated intention to take Taiwan and to overrun that democracy either by force or peacefully, as China claims, that it's getting more dangerous by the day. I just saw a news story of Chinese warships doing a live fire exercise between Australia and New Zealand. So I do believe what's happening in Canada, underneath all of the angry rhetoric and tariff threats, the American government does have a concern that the Chinese Communist Party has a lot of influence, both in the Vancouver model, across Canada into politics at all levels. And as to the World Economic Forum, I really don't have any grounding or expertise to speak to that, but I do have a very solid sense, and that comes from talking to American and Canadian officials, that the American government is quite concerned with China's influence in Mexico and Canada, and the influence that comes through organized crime and financial crime.
Sam, where can our listeners follow you and buy your book, Willful Blindness?
Willful Blindness in the third edition is available on Amazon.ca, and I understand, I know that it launched at number one, making a big waves back in 2021 on Amazon in Canada, and it's back close to that top 50 sellers list. So Amazon is the place to go. I think it's the only place right now to get a copy, but almost everyone has access to that website and service. And beyond that, you can go to thebureau.news online. That's my personal investigative website where I cover these issues about financial integrity and government integrity in Canada, also in the United States, and around the world, including East Asia, the Middle East. I'm looking at a lot of very interesting stories around geopolitics, and as I say, the world seems to be becoming a more dangerous place with war on the rise, and it's a very interesting time, and I try to cover that.
Sam, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Thank you.
My guest has been investigative journalist Sam Cooper. His website, thebureau.news, and he's on X at Scooper Cooper. Coming up, Josef Schachter next on This Week in Money.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Josef Schachter, founder of the Schachter.Energy Report online at Schachter.EnergyReport.ca. He's speaking to us from Calgary. Welcome back to This Week in Money.
My pleasure. Good to be with you again, Jim.
Josef, 2 weeks ago you presented at the World Outlook Financial Conference in Vancouver. You had a special offer for our attendees. Can you extend that special offer to our listeners?
I'd be very happy to do that. The World Outlook Financial Conference was another great success, 1,000 people there. And, there was people there covering mining, covering energy, covering other areas, and technology, etc. And, I did the keynote energy speech. We had 11 energy companies speaking, of which nine I cover, and 9 of them are on our recommended buy list. So we made an offer there for people who were at there, and we're leaving it open now with you until the end of February, and that is that people can get the annual So they can go to www.Schachter.Energy.ca, and they can go to subscriptions, and the annual is $100 off. So instead of $9.99, it's $8.99, and the quarterly, which was $2.99, is $50 off, $2.49, and the codes for that are that they can go to get them would be WOFCA for the annual 25, and for the quarterly WOFC Q25 for the quarterly one. And you have all that information, and you can include it in your release of the interview today.
For some reason, several politicians in Canada seem to be fine with fentanyl and migrants crossing the border into the U.S. If President Trump institutes tariffs against Canada, is this likely to affect the crude oil and natural gas markets in Canada?
Well, number one, if the politicians seem to be fine with it, maybe those are the ones that should be arrested and deported and lose their Canadian citizenship, because anything like that, I think, is stupid. And, wanting fentanyl to come in to kill your children, I think that should be considered a federal crime and deportation, even if you've been a long-standing citizen. So I'm hard on that one. On the migrants issue and the issue of, how does that impact energy, the tariffs, we're going to probably see tariffs. If it's 10%, as I mentioned at the conference, between the Canadian dollar, right now the Canadian dollar has moved up, I think it's 70.5 cents now. We were 68 cents. So if there's a little movement on the Canadian dollar, if we go back down to 68 cents and maybe even to go a little bit lower, and at the same time we have differentials widen, which means heavy oil differentials now are around $15 because the quality of the crude is not as good as light. So it trades at a discount because it also costs more to produce, more to transport because you need diluent. So we could see the spread widen a little bit, $16, $18. So effectively the tariffs will have minimal impact on the energy sector. I think the tariffs where we're really worried about is on forest products, steel industry, and of course for Quebec it's an important industry, the aluminum one, as well as forest products, and mining. So we'll have to wait and see how this all goes down. Trump likes to needle Canada, the Canadian government with 51st state. Of course, most Canadians think that there's not a hope in hell of that happening, and wanting it, even if there was a national referendum. And so I think that what we're looking at is early March, early April, when Trump pulls out all of his next rounds. He's got his people in the Commerce Department looking at every asset class, every product area, and looking at VAT taxes, tariffs, and then non-tariff items where you say you can't bring it in unless it's a certain size, and of course America may not make that size, so you can't bring it in. So, and there's some real tariffs that are rational ones. You can't bring a big Ford F-350 down the streets in many cities in Europe because the narrowness of the roadways. So there are tariffs that you can't really charge against, but those are lifestyle things that stop America from exporting the biggest of their trucks.
From an energy standpoint, do you think there are benefits to Canada becoming the 51st state?
I think the more concerning problem is if for some unfortunate reason the Liberals get reelected in Ottawa, and the lies they're telling everybody about, swinging around lower government, we're not going to have a carbon tax, from both of them, both Chrystia Freeland and from, Carney. I think they're both doing a 180 here. And again, like all politicians, once you get in office, you do what you want. And if they get a majority again, or they get a minority, working minority, with the NDP kissing their ass, You may want to bleep that one. The reality is, I don't think there's any benefits to be part of the 51st state. But if there were a Liberal government in Eastern Canada that was detrimental to Western Canada's interests, i.e. energy and agriculture, etc., I think, everybody worried for years about Quebec separation votes. I would say that there's a high probability if the Liberals get back in, which I think is a low probability, but if they did get back in and they did do the stupid things against the West, I would bet you that there would be a referendum in Western Canada, Saskatchewan, Alberta, the most likely, where they would vote to separate, and then who knows if they become the 51st state. But I would put that as a very low probability event, because I'm hopeful there is a change in Ottawa with a more rational, more sensible pro-business with the Conservatives.
Good goings on in the Middle East, and with OPEC drive crude oil prices higher.
Yeah, there's some issues there. Right now, Trump is not really taking a 2x4 to Iran. They're trying to get the Hamas out of Gaza, which I think is not going to be easy. They're still waiting for more of the, they just released today some of the dead bodies of a family, 4 bodies. They're supposed to release more people on Saturday. If the release of the people continues, then you could see, a quieter period there. And I think that would drive prices lower because people would be saying that, look, there's adequate supplies right now. America's going to have the drill, baby, drill, mental mentality from Trump, but the industry is going to do rational things. They're not going to grow production unless it makes sense. And then you're going to see OPEC have the ability to bring back a little bit of production. So I don't think you're going to see, massive higher prices, $100, $120, unless there was a war between Israel and Iran. The other wild card, of course, is Venezuela. The Americans are not happy with Maduro. They could, stop them from selling oil. They could blockade the country. Americans did blockade Cuba in the past, and that could remove some supply. So if Iran is removed from supply in Venezuela, you could remove 2 to 3 million barrels. That would drive prices up. On the other hand, if there's no issue with these two countries, or diplomacy is allowed to work, and OPEC, brings on production as higher as prices rise, as demand rises, we'll probably see, and this is my forecast, is that we will, be in a range in Q1 between 68 and maybe $79, but each quarter thereafter moving up, and in Q4 of 2025, I see prices over 90, and if you plug that in on an annualized basis for most companies in the sector, they're tremendous bargains, and we think there's a lot of stocks that we cover on our buy list and that we cover on our research that could go up 50% this year. So after 2 years of a flat line for the sector, we had the good years of 2020 to 2022, and then we flatlined thereafter. I think that 2025 is going to be a takeoff year, and then it'll be leading to many years of very positive performance, because as the world economies change around from globalization, that's going to cause more demand. We're going to need production in other countries, not just China, and that's going to cause incremental energy demand. And I think, and also China will move more to a consumer economy, which will increase demand in that country. The export world that they've been focused on for the last few decades, since let's say 1999, so 25, 26 years, they're going to have to focus now on building a consumer economy. Remember, 2/3 of the U.S. and Canadian economies are consumer related. I would think it's less than 30% in China. So that change can mean a meaningful impact on domestic consumption.
There are thoughts that with Doge and Elon Musk uncovering so much waste and fraud that inflation in the U.S. could head towards zero in 2026. In theory, could this be good or bad for the prices for crude and natural gas?
Well, the problem I have is that yes, you have Doge, which is going to gut out maybe 100 billion or 200 billion of government spending, but remember they're on a $2 trillion deficit. So going from a 2 trillion to 1.8 doesn't really do much, and that just takes the debt from 37 trillion to 39 trillion. So it sounds good, and it's heading in the right direction, but it's not meaningful enough. You've got to start to see that deficit swing to a surplus, which I don't see right now anything that's going on in the States where that can happen. So I don't think that's the issue. I think if you look at tariffs, though, that could raise the prices of goods in Canada, and so transporting that and others will have to be finding new markets. So the question is, are we going to be able to have more east-west traffic, east to Europe, west to Asia, and will that increase the demand for energy? If it does, that would raise the price for energy. But a lot of those logistics changes where we change our supply chains take a lot of time. So it's not something that I would expect would be a major factor in 2025.
President Trump's implementing tariffs on steel worldwide. Many mills in Canada and Mexico get steel from China and create products that are shipped to the U.S. Previously, President Trump focused on the poor quality of the steel from China. When poor quality steel is used in infrastructure, buildings, airplanes, military equipment, cars, it's concerning. Do you think Canada should build its own steel industry to produce high quality steel?
Well, we do have Nucor and others where use scrap steel to build, to make steel. And again, the quality, depending upon what you put into a titanium or whatever, what do you make for the consumer, be it the auto industry, Boeing in the airline industry, or whatever, other industries, rail, whatever. You're going to need good quality steel. So China has been dumping, different, lower quality products around the world, but into Canada they've been shipping product that then gets, rolled product that gets it manufactured into things here, reheated and then, stamped and made into the products that the auto industry needs, etc. So I'm not sure it's poor quality anymore. I just think it's being dumped because they want to keep their steel industry working at high levels of utilization, which means they can charge less. And, of course, they then sell it around the world and do it at prices below what the local domestic manufacturers can do it. And that's what's caused a lot of the steel industry companies around the world to shut down because of the unfair trade practices of dumping product on countries below the cost of their production. And that's what Trump's mad about. And that's, in Canada and Mexico are taking advantage of that cheap steel and then selling into the United States products that are needed. So Trump has an argument here. The question is, how do we find a solution around it?
Prime Minister Trudeau just announced the building of a $40 billion high-speed rail line between Toronto and Quebec City. Would it have been better to put that money into a pipeline from west to east?
Oh, my God, of course you'd want that. And you'd like to have, let's just say a corridor from Western Canada, from BC all the way, which would be internet, which would be rail, which would be, pipelines, which would be all kinds of, carbon capture, infrastructure, everything. He's throwing around all kinds of stupid things as he leaves office just to make it more difficult for his successors. There's no logical reason that they're going to, with the $45 billion, that they can get enough ridership to justify it. We've talked for a long time about a railroad between Edmonton and Calgary. Won't happen in my lifetime. You hear about a railroad between Edmonton and Banff. I don't buy that either. The cost and utilization cannot justify it economically. So I think that this is just another one of Trudeau's sunny optimistic views of what can be done, but no rational about the cost of it, and the fact that Canada cannot afford something like that with the size of our deficits, with the fact that we're not spending the money on defense that we're supposed to, the fact that we still haven't bought the submarines. Oh, we're going to buy nukes. Now we're going to buy others. Now we're going to open up the bidding. Maybe we'll buy them by 2030. Maybe we'll have them by 2050. You know, all of this garbage. To me, the priorities of the Prime Minister to say I need a railway is just insanity.
Could we see higher interest rates in Canada to support the Canadian dollar?
I think the Bank of Canada is not going to care about that. I think the issue is going to be the election. If we end up, with a Conservative, with a majority, a decent majority, that will strengthen the Canadian dollar because it'll be a pro-business environment. Just like you look at the rally the U.S. dollar had when Trump won, massive 8% rally in the U.S. dollar. Could the Canadian dollar go from that 68 low to 74, 75, especially if we have $90 WTI? I can make a case for $80 WTI next year, or $80 Canadian dollar next year with a Conservative government, and $90, $95 WTI. I can also make a case for 60-cent dollar, and that would be if Trump and a liberal government are taking cudgels at each other. The Canadian one will be made of softwood lumber, and the American will be hardwood lumber, and we know the end of that one. So my view would be it's an issue that potentially has positives if we have a positive swing in the leadership in Ottawa, but it could go the other way if it doesn't, which is we sure hope doesn't happen.
Is the underlying Canadian economy slowing, causing less demand for energy?
It's slow. There's a bit of a slowdown, and you're seeing a bit of a slowdown in consumption here. But we're in the winter, which is usually high demand. We usually have a softening that goes in once we get into the shoulder season of spring, and then of course fall again. Then when that window happens, so we could see a softening seasonally. But if there is concern about tariffs and the Canadian economy softens some more, retail sales get weak, we see housing slow down even more, then it's possible that we could see more downside.
Gasoline prices across the country have been going up. Vancouver's close to $2 a liter. What's causing that?
Well, there's two issues that I think we all look at. Is the first thing, crude oil's gone back from 68 to we're looking at 72.5. So that's part of it. Carbon pricing. The taxes from the government are in there, and there's a shortage of refining capacity in Western, in BC. So I was there paying $1.95, when I was there for the World Outlook Conference. So it's we're paying $1.52 here in Alberta. So a little bit better, but again, if we can remove the carbon pricing in the price of oil, and we see a little bit of a pullback in the price of oil, it might get a little cheaper. But on the other hand, if I'm right that the economy gets up, we have a new government in Ottawa that's pro-business, common sense, focused, then if the price of oil goes to 90, then, the question is what happens to the provincial and federal taxes that are in there? Will they remove them? And if they don't, then we're probably looking at prices even higher than today going into 2026.
The U.S. dollar's been pulling back. Is this causing energy prices to rise?
You've seen a little bit of a pullback, maybe 2% in the U.S. dollar. I think the reason we saw the price of oil go up is there was a pipeline from Kazakhstan, or a refinery, in Kazakhstan, that was hit by Ukrainian drones because because of the Russians, and that removed some supply And of course, we're seeing tit for tat where Russia is bombing Ukrainian facilities for energy and vice versa. So that caused a bit of a bounce here. And I think that the issue of what happens with Iran, everybody was for a while was worried that Trump was going to take a 2x4 and they would lose production, which would then mean higher prices. But I saw a report this morning that Iran was selling a record amount of oil to China, so we are seeing Iran in the marketplace taking demand from other people.
Nowadays, when we think of rigs, we think of elections, but when it comes to crude and natural gas, rig counts are important. What's the latest on the rig counts? Well,
the rig count for this week comes out tomorrow, but last week's rig count I have in front of me. The Canadian rig count is down 4.7% from a year ago, 245 active rigs, down 4 on the week. Natural gas, though, is where the problem is because of the low prices. We're about $270 right now. The U.S. price today was $415, but we saw almost $450 for NYMEX yesterday because of the very cold weather with the Arctic front, polar vortex heading down to Texas. So you had a 21% decline in the Canadian rig count from 90 a year ago to 71. The oil rig count is going up because of the volumes that can go through the TMX. So we had 174 rigs working, drilling for oil, heavy oil drilling and other oil drilling, up from 144 in 2024. So the industry come out of the gate quickly in 2025, drilling for oil to fill that TMX line that goes to the coast, that goes to either the U.S. or Asia before, to the U.S. still before tariffs, but more and more of that will end up going to Asia if they do install tariffs. So, potentially we could see more volumes going west. I do not believe that the economics make sense for oil pipelines to the East Coast or natural gas. What matters is there's a tremendous amount of natural gas resource in Quebec, between Quebec City and Montreal. Questerre, an Alberta-based company, made the major discoveries with others. It's still there. Right now, Quebec is becoming a little more malleable on maybe we need to, develop that resource. And if they are, and they're willing to let it be exported to the East Coast, then potentially there could be LNG plants on the East Coast. But the gas that goes in there would be from Quebec and also from maybe the Marcellus in the United States.
Well, right now in Quebec is we not frack tabernac. On a specific day, can crude oil and natural gas prices be different in different areas of the world?
Oh, yeah, I think that's normal. Like, for example, in natural gas more so than oil. Oil, you have Brent pricing, you have WTI pricing, you have heavy oil pricing, sour. So pricing can change around the world depending upon the market and what they're buying on oil. But on natural gas, because of the cold winter in Europe, we've seen up to $20 U.S. an MCF for pricing in Europe. That's why companies like Vermilion have been doing quite well selling in that market, and more companies would love to be selling into it. And in in Asia, you're getting mid-teens U.S. and that compares to right now maybe $275 Canadian, for AECO Canadian, and that price I mentioned earlier, $415 U.S. for NYMEX. So the Americans can ship LNG to Asia and make a big profit. Hopefully, in the coming months, LNG Canada opens up and we start having our first shipments on a regular basis to Asia, and that could lift the price of Canadian natural gas in the second half of 2025 to a consistent basis over $3 an MCF, which would be very good for the industry. And instead of drilling less, we would possibly be drilling more. But again, cold weather makes all the difference in the world. The massive drawdowns we've seen in the weather for natural gas, have been the thing that really lifted the price over the $4. Just the data that came out today was 196 BCF drawdown on the week that was announced, the week ending February 14th, which was announced today, released February 20th. But that's storage is now down 15.5% from a year ago, which is a big decrease. And we still have another, let's say, 3-4 weeks of cold weather, and then you have moderate drawdowns at the end, through mid-end March, and then April 1st is the injection season again. So we're going to see a big drawdown this year, which is good, and it's going to set the stage for a much better natural gas environment, in my opinion, in the second half of this year and then 2026.
Do you think pressure is growing in Canada to have pipelines within Canada from east to west?
I think there's more talk about it, but it's economics. The cost of these things that we know with TMX and also Coastal Gas have blown way beyond what the original budgets were, and so I don't believe going east is logical. The numbers are just staggering. Going west, I think, is very logical for both oil and natural gas. Could we do another line on TMX? Could you do Northern Gateway again if the numbers make sense? Could we do way more natural gas? I think yes. So I think that the west line, getting access to Asia, especially if Trump puts in a lot of tariffs, the left-wing government in your province are going to move into the center because they're going to realize that the economics of the province now require them, if they want to be a wealthy province, they've got to be looking at markets in Asia because these going south is not going to be as favorable anymore.
It looks like Prime Minister Trudeau is on his way out. During his reign, what has he done for energy in Canada?
Harmful the whole darn time. Almost every policy he's done, everything he's done with between the different bills, Bill 59, Bill 69, you can't talk about what you're doing in the oil patch, muzzling free speech, everything on the pipelines, everything on carbon, every damn thing he's done since he came into office has been negative. In some ways, he may have been worse than his dad. Goodbye, good riddance, and we don't give a damn, and we don't want to see you again.
Despite President Trump removing electric vehicle mandates, the electric vehicle market continues to grow. Could this lead to lower crude prices, or would producers just reduce output to keep prices high?
No, I don't think it has anything to do with production. I think production will stay and grow because demand is going to be growing, for other products that we use that use oil as an input. Also, the emerging world that's going to be bringing lithium, copper, cobalt, nickel, all the things we need as inputs of rare earths and others are going to require their countries to use more energy. I see the OECD having less demand at the end of this decade than we do now, but I see non-OECD demand growing by 5-6 million barrels more than the reduction that we see from the OECD. So I think that to me is really the fact that we're going to be seeing more demand. So if we have, let's say, 104 million barrels demand this year, maybe it's 105.5 next year. I think it could be 108 to 110 at the end of the decade, but we could see the OECD demand come down 2 to 3 million, more than offset by the demand in the emerging world.
Would you buy an electric vehicle?
I think people are finding in cold weather that the range of the vehicles are not up to what they say, the posted. In the southern, United States, warmer markets, maybe Vancouver Island, maybe, the lower, Toronto area where you don't get a lot of really cold weather and snow, it makes sense that you can do that. But until, they solve the cold weather issue, we all have range anxiety when you think about buying an EV. But I think at some point it's going to, they're going to break through on the technologies, and it is a possibility. But I think people need to, remember that, the issue with EVs are what happens if the battery goes and you have to replace the battery? What about repairs? I think a lot of the things that we think about with electric cars as we have more and more of them on the road, people are finding that there's some cost issues that they never figured when they originally bought the vehicle. And, of course, you're seeing a lot of people not very happy owning Teslas right now, given some of the comments from Elon Musk. And there's been desecration on a lot of Teslas across Canada. I gather people are buying bumper stickers. I bought this Tesla before Elon went to Washington. So, to hopefully not have somebody damage their vehicle.
Can you tell us again about your special offer and where our listeners can subscribe?
Yeah, my pleasure. Go to www.Schachter, Schachter, energyreport.ca, and we have two offers, one for an annual, one for a quarterly. So the code for the annual, which would be $100 off from $9.99 to $8.99, is WOFCA for annual 25, and the quarterly, which we normally have $2.99, is $2.49, up off $50. So that one is WOFCQ 25. So again, WOFCA 25 for the annual, WOFCQ 25 for the quarterly, and you just plug those into the promo code at the check-in, and you'll get the discount. And remember, one of the key things I wanted to mention is we had kind of a 2.5-year kind of no zone where the energy index was flat, the CRB was flat. We've seen gold take off, and a few other commodities do well. I think this year we're going to see the whole commodity board wake up. The CRB's high 2 years ago was 330. We're like 313 now. I think it's going to break through, and I think if I'm right about energy going to 90 in the fourth quarter for WTI and natural gas, $3. I think we have a lot of stocks that could go up 50%. So, if you own any of the Canadian mid-cap or juniors or energy service or royalty trusts, we cover them. Just go to the website, and there's some free research you can see of what we do cover, and then just go and subscribe. We're going to have something that people should, if you want to become a subscriber, definitely consider doing it between now and next Thursday. We have our quarterly webinar, which is a 90-minute webinar, which we go over what's going on in the markets, top picks, and then we'd have 2 Q&As. That starts at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, Calgary, and we do that for 90 minutes, and then it goes into our archives, so people, if they can't listen during the night of Thursday, they can listen on the weekend at their leisure.
Joseph, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
My pleasure as always. Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Josef Schachter, founder of the Schachter.Energy Report online at Schachter.Energyreport.ca. He was speaking to us from Calgary. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank our guests, Bob Hoye, Sam Cooper, and Josef Schachter. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions for the show or for our guests, you can send them to info@housestreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of House Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen.